Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for those of you who are joining us. We're here today to hopefully help other people, organizations think about managing their data and how you can make it accessible and actionable, and how you can use those data to grow your organizations and in your businesses. I'd ask that the runner show here is going to be, we're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if everybody can hold their questions to the end, that'd be great. I guess I'll also add too that I know that there's some people in the audience who aren't in the media space, so I will do my best as the moderator to prompt Michele and Sarth to explain the words they use sometimes, which might be quite foreign to your ears. But if I do forget, hopefully Emma, if you're in the audience and we're saying words that we're not explaining, please do remind me. And with that, I think we will start with some introductions here with Michele and Sarth. And so, Michele, if you would take a couple minutes to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Michele Stone. I work at Paramount in the advanced advertising division. I run the product and the planning teams. I've been at Paramount for about 7 years now. Before that, I worked at Group M for about 10 years, 8 of those as a television media buyer, and then a few years within their advanced advertising team, building out their data-driven linear product. So I've been at Paramount now for, I think it's almost 7 years.
And Sarth.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarth Calhoun, and I'm an engineer here at Reaktor. And I did about 9 months working on the Paramount data project and porting the pipelines and implementing QA. So I'm excited to share some of the stuff we learned.
Yeah, my name's Ian Fosbury. I also work at Reaktor, but I've been working with Paramount, our clients, for off and on since 2017. Michele and I have been working together for, I think, almost 3 years now. And yeah, I'm excited to try and moderate this discussion and get into it. Yeah. So with that, I guess we're going to be talking a lot about data in the context of Paramount and what we've done there and all the work that's going on there. So I think I'm going to throw it to Michele first to kind of set the stage in terms of the data landscape and thinking about the advanced advertising business and Vantage. And Vantage is obviously a core product. Maybe you can mention and give a bit of a description as to what that is for those on the call that don't know what it is. But in that context, like, it's grown quite a bit in the last 5 to 6 years. So can you talk about the changes you've seen in the industry and how data has played a part in that growth?
Sure. Maybe I'll take an extra step back and just kind of start with advertising in general and how it historically looked versus how it looks now. So when advertising and television primarily, but really when you think about advertising in general, most advertising has historically been done on broad age sex demographics, like trying to reach women 25-54, adults 18 to 49. When I came over to Paramount around 7 years ago, there was a change in advertising to move away from broad age sex demographics to more advanced advertising against specific target consumers, auto intenders or QSR purchasers or what have you. And that was a big change in the advertising industry in general, especially within the TV landscape, to be able to target against a core audience, a custom audience versus broad age sex demographics. In order to be able to advertise against a very specific audience in television, you really needed to have more sophisticated data capabilities and data access to be able to advertise in that way and optimize a media plan in that way. So when Vantage and advanced advertising began at Paramount, it was really around building media plans, optimal media plans, first in television, that reached a specific audience that our advertisers cared about. All advertisers out there have a very good sense of who their core consumers are, but then they would buy television media on people 18 to 49. Now we're able to take that very specific audience and transact and activate against that. And in order to do that, we needed to have granular data access. We needed to be able to integrate machine learning and data science into viewership, taking viewership data and building data science models to be able to predict how a more unique and specific audience was viewing content. And we started this from a linear perspective. Early on, we did, I know that, for people who are not very familiar with media, there's currencies that we transact against within the TV industry. Historically, there's been really one currency that has kind of led the charge, but that has changed. And now there's more of a multi-currency future where people are using bigger data sets to generate viewership information. So within the advanced advertising division, we've kind of started early on using multiple currencies to be able to transact against advanced audiences, because with some of that bigger data, meaning viewership data that's coming from various sources, including set-top box and ACR data, you're able to get much more granular and more specific, especially when you're working with large audiences. So that is kind of what we've been thinking about from, how advanced advertising began. And that's a little bit of a deep dive on some of the specifics, but that has kind of evolved a lot over the years. And I think that's what we're here more to talk about today, is how the evolution of advanced advertising and data and technology and convergent media buys has evolved. And when I say convergent, that means the intersection between linear and digital. Nowadays,
and just to interrupt real quick, Michelle, what does linear mean for some of the people who might not know? Yeah.
So when you think about linear television, it's like, the old school way of watching television through more of a set-top box. If you have a set-top box provider that you're viewing television on, and everybody that's viewing television is watching the same thing at the same time, seeing all the same commercials at the same time, that's a linear television. You're not able to kind of target an individual household, or everybody's kind of seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
When that kind of shifted beyond just linear television, and people weren't really, it didn't matter how they were consuming video, they were consuming video on connected TV or a set-top box. Video kind of just became video, but the way that you transact against that is still very separate. There's different ways of serving ads, whether you're watching it from a cable provider versus a connected television. And while as a consumer, you're just viewing video content, you don't really care where you're watching it. As somebody who's serving those ads, it's a very different process. So we've had to do a lot of work to understand all of the data that intersects across those different ecosystems to make sure that when we're advertising to our consumers, they're getting a good experience, and that our clients, when they come to us to spend their media investment, that they're getting the most out of that by some of the advancements in data and technology that we've been able to integrate into our products. So that's kind of been a really big evolution over the last, I would say, 5 years, where we moved away from just a linear television world. A lot of consumers of video, we moved away from the old school traditional way of viewing content and moved beyond that. And with that comes the need for advancements in data, advancements in technology, and advancements in the way that you're able to collect data and transact against a media player. So we've kind of moved into this, like I mentioned, multi-currency environment where there's more than one player. With that comes a ton of information, a ton of data that we need to store and process and make sure that we're transacting against. Within the digital or connected TV ecosystem, there's a ton of data, a ton of information, and then finding the intersection in kind of like an identity layer in between all of those things, from households to IP, in, of course, a very privacy compliant way, is also something that we think about all the time. So this is a lot of, advertising words, but it all kind of comes down to having good data coming in, really strong machine learning, data science approaches for collecting and processing that data to activate into a media plan, and then really strong infrastructure and pipelines that are processing that data and making sure that it is flowing into all of our processes in a good way.
The way that we want, yeah. Yeah, so I guess I'll throw it to Sarth now just to kind of talk a bit about given everything that Michele has just mentioned, moving from these single smaller currencies to they've been growing, and now we have more currencies, now we have digital, we have a lot of data sources here. How can you speak to like the importance of designing and having a system that's flexible enough that can handle all of these things? Like, what are the things you need to think about as an organization the size of like Paramount?
So the first thing that we did when we came in to start porting one of the pipelines over to modern technology, because we've done it, I think there'd been a good discovery of what technology to use a data warehouse and a schema on read and all the flexibility that entails. But the first thing you have to do is actually a knowledge problem, because you need to document what all the data you're receiving is. You get data from different partners, and each one of them also sends different formats of data that encompass different time frames or things like that. And so all of this knowledge has to be documented. And usually it's living in people's heads, or it's living in the code somehow, and it's just implied. And so the first thing we did is we want to address the human problem, get all that knowledge documented, listed out, communicate it to all the internal stakeholders. Everybody agrees this is the format of each of these kinds of data that we get, and then communicate that back to the partners and say, look, this is our expectation. And so now we're all on the same page. Beyond that, you want to create a simplified pipeline where by using the schema on read, you make as few decisions early in the process as possible. That way, if you want to add another partner, the load stage, for example, is so generic that it's trivial to just make a couple of changes and load a new kind of data. So those are the kinds of things you really have to think about.
Maybe you could just also explain quickly what schema on read means for the people here who aren't engineers.
Yeah, so what schema on read means is in a sort of like more traditional database, you usually think that you're going to define the form of your data, and then you start loading data into tables, right? But with schema on read, what we're doing is we're doing an append-only system, which is, because we're using Snowflake external tables, but there are other data warehouses where you can do the same thing. So with all data as it comes in, we just load it agnostically into the database. And then when you go to query the data, you're actually then defining what the data is. And so if you need to make a change, or you get a change in your understanding of the data or something like that, you don't have to reload anything. You just change the way you're querying it.
Yeah, I think that was definitely like a big win for us, that we've only continued to discover the advantages of doing it that way as we've gotten deeper and deeper into the new system. Michele, what do you think that advertisers, publishers, or just organizations in general, because I know there's a lot of people here who aren't in the media space, but like, what are the things that you need to think about in terms of managing your systems and technology for, like, in our case, a more convergent future, or maybe for other verticals of like other industries, like when you go from these like smaller places you can get data to now that, data is everywhere. We can get it all over the place, and we have all this data that we have to marry. Like, what are the things we need to think about in terms of growth and the future of an organization?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Sarth mentioned is, really important is making sure that when you're setting things up and setting up your pipelines, that you're doing it in a way that's repeatable. I think, it's naive to think that you can, plan for the future, because you never really can, but you can set up, try to prepare for what the future might look like. And what I think we all know of the future is there will be more access to data and information than ever before. There will be access to data and information with advancements in technology that are going to allow you to process things faster, to do more with it, and kind of setting up all of your backend to prepare for that future, and then always making sure that you're continuing to stay on top of the latest updates or ways to optimize how you process data or how you're connecting that information into your products. I think making sure that you're kind of staying ahead of the curve. And I think working within the advanced advertising team at Paramount, that's kind of the way that we always try to think, is one step ahead. What's going to happen next? How do we prepare for the future? So while you can't always do that, I think that's what we've really been thinking about over the last few years, is kind of pivoting to a way that allows for greater scalability, greater data processing, and improvements in technology. All of that, if your systems and your backend are set up properly from an advertising perspective, it kind of opens up a world of possibilities for publishers, for our clients, for our media buyers, to be able to process and share information and just make things go much further when we're thinking about it from an advertising perspective. But I think that can apply to really any industry, is if you have the proper data, the proper technology, it opens up a world of possibilities that just weren't available in the past. So I think it's really an exciting time as we think some of the emerging changes that are happening really in our industry specifically, but really across various industries with the advancements in technology.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you mentioned scalability, and I guess, Sarth, I'll throw it back to you here about how do you, with all this data, and it's only getting bigger, there's only more sources, more. How do you think about, and how do you make sure that you're building a system that can scale along with that?
Right. So, and that's really important, right? As we're getting more and more data, everything I mentioned before factors into that. Obviously, if you're building your system at a higher level of abstraction and things are replicable, that's really important. Another one is, just you need to centralize your pipeline. Like, these pipelines are big and complicated, right? And it's easy to end up with multiples somehow over the years. And you really need to centralize where you're doing everything, so that, that's a big part of scaling. Another one is just automate. There's going to be a lot of manual processes that are happening. Anytime you can find a way to automate something, do that. It's going to help you scale. It's really important that you be able to parallelize how you ingest the data. And this goes back to the schema and read and the append only thing. Just keep coming back to that, because if you were doing a normal CRUD database, right, and you're getting data that's being updated over time to become more and more accurate, then what you'd be doing is you'd be finding rows in your database and overwriting those rows with new information that's more accurate and more up to date. The problem is that means you have to load your files linearly one at a time. If you ever need to reload them, you have to do that again. So when you do like a schema on read and external tables and things like that, you can parallelize the loading. And so then that's a huge scalability benefit. And then you got to make it really easy for people to consume the data, right? Because as we get more and more data, people can't be doing like complicated, idiosyncratic processes to get the data. So we have to make sure that we're serving it to the stakeholders in a way that's easy to use.
Yeah, for sure. Did you did mention about reloading the data? Like, I guess this is something that we've often talked about, but like, I mean, with what we would call as engineers idempotency, but like the ability to reload data again and again and make sure that you get the same result. I think it's like another really important thing, probably, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that was always part of the design spec for these pipelines, but you want to know for sure it's going to be this, and that actually relates to the concept of auditability too. Being able to audit the data, and being able to go back in time and see where it was, and to be confident about that, exactly what you got historically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I guess that's actually something that we've maybe I can throw that to Michele real quick. Like, that was something when you came to us, was like, we want auditability. We want the ability to say, like, this was what the data looked like then, this is what the data looks like now, right? And
yeah.
I guess especially as Paramount is like a publicly traded company, those are the sorts of things that you have to think about.
Yeah, and I think some of the importance of that too is when we think about it from an advertising perspective, and we think about it from, there is a third-party source that informs the viewership data and is the source of truth for viewership data. There used to, only really be one in that world, and everybody knew if there was something changing, it was a broad announcement. Everybody knew something was changing. They were prepared for it. In a multi-currency future where things are changing, from multiple providers, there's multiple now currencies or source of truth depending upon what you're activating against. If something, and there's various ways that each of those are being processed, right? Like, so I think being able to know that something changed, when it changed, and how it changed, so that you can answer questions to your clients if you need to, restate something or reissue something that was already finalized. It's important that you know why or how, without so much back and forth with the provider. Obviously we do that from a business perspective, but having that readily available from a data access perspective of, hey, this changed. We might need to still go to the provider and say, why did this change? But like, we're able to visibly see it without time going by and questions being asked. So I think that is a really important thing. As we continue to expand and get more information available to us, knowing that if there's any change in data for any reason, that we can see it visibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I guess that leads into my next question, which is, and this is for both of you guys, but so Michele, as a member of the team that's always been using the data, and I guess now also you're now kind of the manager of all the data, or at least for a lot of it at Paramount. And Sarth is like a maintainer of the data. Like, how important are things like QA and monitoring? And how can you always think about, like, how do we make it better? How do we evolve those processes?
I mean, if you can't trust the data, you can't really use it, right? And I guess where I see the QA, and because the QA was a big part of what I was working on late last year and early this year, the QA is there to stop the problems before they get big, right? It's better not to load a bad file than it is to load a file and like all of a sudden all your data is like weird and you're serving up the wrong stuff. I'd much rather be just a couple days behind than serving up bad things, right? And you don't want to find out that you're serving up bad things because the stakeholders are like, whoa, this doesn't make any sense. Why are you giving me this? You want to find it out as soon as possible and deal with it as early as possible. And you can see the need for QA when you dig through the code, because there's like scar tissue in the code. You'll see that stuff was written to like deal with that one time that thing happened. And then you say, okay, well, maybe this is a spot where we need a QA check, and doing QA at each part of the pipeline is also really important. So everything earlier, always catch earlier.
I like that scar tissue. And I think that that's important because there's often times that you have to get things fixed quickly. You kind of put a quick fix in place and you always have to go back to it to make sure that it's, fixed in the right way. But then being able to catch anything before the users do, I think is so important. I mean, everything we're talking about here is data that's flowing into products that end users are relying on. And that confidence and reliability in the products that they're using and the information that they're getting is crucial in everything that we're doing, especially from, an advertising perspective. We want to know that the data that's informing how we're pricing our plans or how we're managing our deals is as strong as it can be. And when you're processing a ton of data, also relying on, data science that's being implemented in it. There's a ton of stuff that's flowing into those products that those users are using, and being confident in the products you're using is so important from the user perspective. And then, from everybody who's processing that data, making sure that they never have to hear something looks wrong is so important, that it's being caught upstream. So I know I'm sure every team makes sure that they're thinking about this all the time, because it's crucial to our business. And I am, happy that this is something that we constantly prioritize because it's so important. And, feeling confident in everything that's being processed is a wonderful feeling as both a data owner and
And a user.
and a user. So
Yeah. You're at both
I mean,
ends of it.
fundamentally, they're. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna maybe point out too, like just like looking back, I bet there are times when I can remember, and I'm just ruminating on this while Michele was talking about it, was there were probably times that she can remember where there was an issue, and okay, we have to mobilize the entire engineering team to now go figure it out. Whereas these days, it's like we don't have that problem. I mean, sure, it happens from time to time again, but like now we have such better QA and monitoring that it's like we only need one person to go look, and we can usually get an answer for whomever it is in a matter of minutes, right? Yeah. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, all I was going to say is it is axiomatic that the earlier you catch an error, the less human hours are wasted by being affected by that error.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. And I actually, I guess at the scale of a Paramount, that can actually be very costly, right? So yeah, it's really important. Sarth, maybe you could also talk about, and this is a word that we've thrown around a lot, but data lineage in terms of QA and monitoring. Like when we see there's an issue, but it's like further downstream, like what is data lineage and why is it important to have that?
Well, so we have our live monitoring of the current conditions of things. And those are like a lot of SQL views and dashboards and stuff like that. So we can always tell whether things are wrong right now. But in order to figure out why they're wrong, or were they wrong before and then they got right, that's why you need the data lineage. And that's, and that's where you can start to really like build different ways of detecting anomalies, is that you can see that things are changing over time in weird ways. And also if you want to troubleshoot why something went wrong, but now maybe it's better now, but you still want to know why it went wrong before, because it's going to go wrong again, probably. So you need that lineage. You need the history of data.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess also to talking a bit about when setting up this QA and monitoring, it's probably not something you want to try and ad hoc ad nauseum. Like you probably want to set up some kind of framework, whether it be something you build or some third-party tool, but like having a QA framework that I guess makes it easier to do QA. Like in that, is that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we put a lot of work into the QA framework we did for this repo. I think we rewrote it 3 times, and I think that was the right number of times. Like we wrote it 3 times, rewrote it twice. You need to abstract it and make it composable so that it's easy for someone to make a new check when a new potential problem is discovered. And the friction to implementation, it's just like writing tests for your code. The more friction to implementation, the more someone's going to sort of just not get around to doing that because they want to do something more pressing. So the idea is anybody on the team should be able to quickly understand what the framework is for doing QA and implement a new check. And that's going to make for better QA because people will make more checks.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. All right. Well, I guess maybe to start thinking about this, I don't know if this will be my last question for you, but one of the last. Are there any principles or recommendations that we'd want to impart to people on the call, other organizations, to help think about maximizing their growth, leveraging their data, like for the future? Anything we want to think about talking about in that regard?
I mean, I would harken back to what Michele was talking about thinking a little bit long term. Like, I think it's just important to accept that these pipelines are big and that they tend to hang around for years, and they have to be rewritten. Parts of them have to be rewritten. They have to be worked on. They're a long-term endeavor. They're a big endeavor, and you just have to kind of build with that in mind and budget with that in mind, and just think of it as long-term.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would echo that statement as thinking about it not only from a pipeline development perspective long term, but also from like a business perspective, making sure that like you're staying ahead of what's to come, and kind of preparing for the future, and not building reactively, but building building proactively, and I think that's how we've always kind of thought about it in our team. But I think in general, trying to kind of get ahead of those trends so that you're prepared once you have to shift.
Yeah, for sure. Is there also anything to, I know we touched on this a couple of times, but like maybe we didn't just circle back on it. But I mean, Michele, you've seen at Paramount, it's grown from the one product advantage to now, I don't even know how many products we have. It's hard to remember sometimes, but like the importance of you're going to end up supporting other teams in your organization probably if you're the shepherds of the data. So like, what are some of the things you can think about there?
Yeah, so I think the way that when you're at a a large organization, I think especially nowadays things are kind of coming together and people are trying to find synergies across different areas. There's oftentimes that across a large company, you realize there's somebody on the other side of the wall that's doing something adjacent to what you're doing in a different way. So I think making sure that you always are making the connections across the organization, understand what everybody is doing with all of these, changes in technology and everything else. But I think also applying a lot of the learnings that you have for one specific area and being able to kind of take those learnings and technology and capabilities and broaden it. I think that's what we've been doing a bit more over the last maybe few years, is taking some of the technologies that we've had within advanced advertising and implementing that into other areas. Machine learning isn't necessary for just advanced deals. It is very helpful for non-advanced deals that allow you to support research teams with more advances in kind of data science mostly. Some of the convergent capabilities that we've had for Vantage, we've also thought about from a broader perspective. So really just once you kind of do it in this silo for a specific reason, taking that and kind of expanding it for the greater of our overall business is kind of what we've been thinking about. And I think what our entire company thinks about. We share information with each other. We want to make sure that as an overall business, if we see an advancement or we see a technology that works or we learn something new about AI capabilities, that we're constantly sharing that information. So I think as a company, we do a really good job of teaching each other often and expanding capabilities that we have for the broader organization.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that like also kind of goes back to what you were talking about centralizing things and centralizing pipeline. Because you don't want multiple teams in an organization trying to do the same thing in slightly different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And, also just the cognitive overhead of knowing that there's all these different pipelines wandering around and maybe you have to work on them, maybe you don't, maybe you have no access to them. I mean, it's just as much of that you can get rid of as possible. You're going to be a lot happier, right?
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. Well, I don't know. Is there any other last thoughts I would offer for either of you before we open it up for a Q&A?
Schema on read is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm an evangelist for it.
You are. All right. Well, so for those of you on the call, you should see a questions button in the bottom right of your screen. Please feel free to ask any questions in there, and I will be happy to read them out, and we can talk some more. Hopefully, impart more wisdom to anyone who wants it. Okay, so Rebecca's asking, how is AI being utilized at Paramount to improve operations and detect anomalies in data? AI, the hot topic.
Hot topic. So I think there's, a ton of teams across the organization using AI in a ton of different ways. I think like I said, I think maybe too many times is we've been using different machine learning techniques for a really long time to process viewership data. I think in general, we are constantly exploring new capabilities, including AI, and how we can kind of allow that to help what we're doing operationally in processing information in general. So I think like we're constantly thinking about it and exploring it. There's a ton of teams across the organization that are beginning to integrate it into various operational tools. I feel like it's one of those, it's not just a buzzword, obviously. I'm going to say it's one of those buzzwords like clean rooms, like multiple currencies, AI. These are all things that we're beginning to explore, test out, and implement where it makes sense. It's not going to be a overnight change in everything that we're doing, but we're definitely starting to figure out where we can find efficiencies by using some of these newer technologies, including AI.
Yeah. And Sarth, I know that you're I know that you love use some chat GPT and some AI. I don't know, what are you thinking about in terms of like how AI can be used? First in the context of data, but maybe, I don't know, like a little bit like
I mean, I think the
beyond that in
QA
all
use
things.
cases, right? I mean, that's pretty
Yeah.
obvious, because it's like checking anomalies in data, finding anomalies in the data that we wouldn't hard code for. There's a lot of stuff that you could do with an algorithm. This number has changed in an unexpected way. That's, it's kind of hard and it's a little bit duct tapey to do it that way. It'd be a lot better if it was done with AI, for sure.
Yeah.
Like anomaly detection, unknowns. That's probably the biggest use case that jumps out at me.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, of course, all of us writing our emails faster.
Right, which has been helpful.
Time saved.
Apparently, they just added it to Google Docs, and I don't know. I mean, Michele, you've been an Excel wizard for so many years now. I don't know what they're gonna do with Excel. They just start writing your formulas for you.
What would I do on my downtime?
Right. Okay. Sarah is asking, do you have suggestions for how to create a data dictionary or a common data scheme store that is updated and maintained across the board, at least semi-automated? Appreciate thoughts on tools and best practices. Best practice processes. Yeah. Sarth, do you want to take this one?
I'm throwing that back to you.
To me. All right. I could actually, but this is something we've been thinking about at Paramount for a while. It sadly, sometimes it does take a backseat to actually getting things running, but I guess if there's no data to have a dictionary of, then there's no point in having the dictionary to begin with. But there's certainly some, obviously the tools that come to mind first are AWS Glue, or depending if you're on AWS, or I'm sure there's similar projects on GCP or Azure. But I think it is really important to take the time to both understand and document the data and how it is coming in, kind of what Sarth and Michele were both talking about, like with your partners and wherever you're getting the data, like wherever that first entry point is, like having that team understand what the data is and how and what it means. And then, but from that documentation, you should be able to codify how it should be used in some way, shape, or form using those tools. I would also say that there is, going back to the topic of AI, this is actually a great use case for that, probably. I know that there's a couple of companies out there right now this is like their thing, like, because there's a startup for everything all of a sudden with AI. And I've definitely seen a few, I can't remember their names, but I know that they are at the Snowflake conference right now in Vegas trying to get customers. So if you happen to be in Vegas, I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. But yeah, it is a great use case for AI, because it, like a large language model could easily look at large data sets and say, okay, this is what this data is, this is what it represents, this is what you can expect from it. And I think it is also a good thing to have as well for like to make the data accessible to other teams, so that they can understand what it is. For us at Paramount, I guess we've been doing that because we work tightly with a lot of our consumers, so they've been around from the beginning and in this entire project of building out this data infrastructure. So they're pretty versed in what we have, but there are going to be more teams in the future. So it is something we have to start thinking more about at this point, I think. I don't know, Michele, is there anything you want to add? I guess as someone who's not an engineer, how nice would it be to have a data dictionary of like explaining all the datums?
Gosh, I think that even not, even when you think about like, Paramount in general, we've had, we've come together over time between Viacom and CBS, and then some of our digital properties, Pluto, kind of all over the place. The way you call like a single program in each environment may be different now that we share libraries. So I think like data dictionaries are becoming more and more important for various use cases, just to make sure that something you're calling, what you're calling one thing is the same everywhere. Especially once we move into this world where we're sharing information, through things like clean rooms, to advertising partners or whoever, making sure that you're all speaking that same language in all systems and workflows is going to become, I don't know, I think about it often.
Yeah.
Probably too often, because, we can call a single advertiser 3 different things in 3 different systems, like unifying program names, unifying everything, is so important.
I would also add to for Sarah, one important thing before doing the data dictionary is actually standardizing your data.
Yeah.
So like when you transform it, make sure that you're going to have these different data sources, but if they're all currencies, like the currencies should all be using the same column names. If they're all identity things, those things should all be like, you want to standardize things as much as possible so that you're not having to maintain 4 different data dictionaries when it could just be one. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I think the standardization is really the first piece that everybody thinks about a lot more. And I think there's a lot of tools out there that allow you to do that better now. There's probably some room still.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, up next, Desi is asking, you mentioned when creating data pipelines, they'll often be around for a long time. How should teams weigh the decision between building completely new pipelines versus updating, maintaining existing pipelines that are out of date and may not align with current needs and technologies? Sarah, do you want to take that?
I can take a little bit of it. I would say the 2 things that I would think about is, one is, how well is a legacy pipeline working? Like, if you have something legacy and it's actually really working for you, I mean, I just think we should all remind ourselves that if it's working, you don't necessarily have to mess with it, right? Or is it something that's giving you constant problems, right? And so usually things are one or the other. I mean, I know there's an in-between world, but usually things like either pretty much work all the time or pretty much constantly give you problems. And then the other thing you want to ask yourself is like, how transformative is the technology that you might be like, if you rebuild a pipeline with completely new technology, like really quantify what that's going to do for you, right? So in the case, and that might be that you for a moment, you're going to have to maintain multiple pipelines because you may have to test, okay, I'm going to do some stuff in using this new technology. And then I'm going to see, probably the first time you do it with the new technology, right? You did it wrong, and then you have to do it again with the new technology. And now you're using it right. And then you have to say, like, what did this really enable? And if it's transformative, then put your energy there. Port everything into a new pipeline as fast as you can. If it's kind of not making that much of a difference, you should be honest with yourself about that and say, I don't know, who's pressuring me to use this new technology, or why was I feeling excited about it?
Yeah, for sure. I think that like measurement is also a really important thing too. Like especially with pipelines, they take time. So if you've got a legacy pipeline, and for whatever reason, maybe because it's loading data the way that Sarth was describing, where it's one piece of data at a time and it's doing it all serially and in order, and that takes days. And then you're able to prove out that, like, okay, if we're able to parallelize this and use some of the techniques that Sarth was talking about, we can do this in hours or minutes. Like, that's a major shift in win. But if you're only improving it, like if you have a pipeline that takes 2 hours and you got it down to 1 hour and 50 minutes just by rewriting it, that's probably a loss. Yeah. Is there anything, I don't know, Michelle, is there anything you have to say about that? I guess from because you manage the teams that manage the pipelines and stuff, so you have to think about I know we've had conversations about this, about certain pipelines that we have that are legacy, and do we abandon ship or do we just hold on for a little
Yeah,
while
I
longer?
think your point was right on like how much value is it driving, and there's probably one continually to monitor, make sure things are behaving as they should, and don't just revisit it years from now and say, oh, this could be better. Like if you're constantly making sure that it's working properly, that's step one.
Right.
Step two is what value does it bring? How much value does it bring? How much disruption does it bring? I think is a really important thing to, and can you make a change to it without totally rewriting it or rebuilding it?
Yeah.
So I think that's what we think about, and there's certain areas where the new thing makes a huge difference and certain areas where it doesn't, and evaluating that all the time. There's only so many resources and time to
Exactly. Yeah,
make
that's
broad
for sure.
changes.
Yeah. I think also too, maybe something else to think about in this, we've been in this situation recently at Paramount, was sometimes a partner is not going to give you a choice. So they might change the way that they are delivering the data to you, and you have to make a pretty significant change to your pipeline anyways. And that can also be a forcing function to be like, well, this pipeline was giving us headaches. This might be a good opportunity to just fix it, like rewrite it and fix it. So look for those opportunities too. Those are good opportunities to try and do that.
Yeah, but I do like Sart's take on like if it's not broken, then maybe we don't need to.
I mean, if it's working, that's like 90% of your problems right there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely. Jamie's asking, do you have some examples of how advancements in data processing have enhanced the efficiency of Paramount's operations? Sarth, do you want to take that? I mean, I know we've been saying schema on read over and over, but
yeah, I don't know. I can't just keep saying schema on read. ELT, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, ELT, like being able to move things to be parallel is incredibly efficient, and being able to make changes to the database without reloading anything is incredible efficiency improvement. No, I think we've also had a lot of efficiency improvements on the consuming the data side, but I was less involved in that end of things.
Yeah, for sure. I think that some of the advancements, I mean, we've obviously made an investment in moving to Snowflake at Paramount, and both the consumers and us as the data team have really enjoyed that. It's been, in my opinion anyways, and this is speaking as someone who was like, afraid of change way back when, but I'm certainly on board with it now. It's been a lot easier to use, and a lot, it's a true data warehouse product. Another word we've been throwing around a lot that we keep saying is clean rooms. Maybe we can talk about that for a hot minute. What is a clean room, and why might someone want to use it? Sarth, do you want to give it a shot?
So clean rooms are like the next evolution after like data sharing, but with like a lot more. So it's a lot. Clean rooms are a data sharing situation that are set up that have a lot of controls over what data can be accessed. So one company has their data, and another company wants to be able to query it, but there's all these reasons why you shouldn't be allowed to see aspects of this data. And I mean, I guess you could just make some limited views or something like that, but what a clean room will give you a lot more granular control over how the other company is allowed to consume the data that you have. And this is good for compliance, mostly for compliance, right? Mm-hmm. Compliance and any other reasons why you might want to keep certain data secret.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, Michele can talk a lot, maybe more about like just like the PII and how we have to think about that at Paramount, and that's probably analogous to a lot of other industries.
Yeah, I think there, like Sarth kind of mentioned, there's information you don't want to be sharing back and forth, but you want an easy way to process information between companies, right? So like there could be multiple companies or multiple sources that are kind of hooked into a clean room for easy sharing and processing of information that you can kind of just pull out those results without having to see or access every piece of it. So I think, when we're thinking about it from an advertising perspective, being able to easily, share an audience and connect it without having to send anybody your first party data. On the back end, being able to do a measurement across multiple sources that have different pieces of that data, right? There might be, somebody like a Paramount who has your logs of where that advertisement ran, a viewership source that might have details around who viewed that linear content, who viewed the digital content, and then maybe an attribution provider who actually has information on who took an action or, made a sale or whatever it is, and being able to kind of share that information cross company to create results and easily pull out the results of various information that each party has that is their own. I think that's how we're thinking about these type of capabilities in the future. I think the possibilities are somewhat endless, but also being smart about what is just a data share versus what is really a clean room. Where is it worth spending the time and effort to create this, clean room? I mean, what I just mentioned there sounds like a lot of setup that's required, and there is, but the value that you can extract from it is great. It's not always necessary to use that type of technology, and making sure that you're clear on where it is necessary and where it's not, and accessing the data properly, I think is also something we're thinking about, and making sure that we're using it when necessary.
Yeah, I loved working with you, Michele. You're an engineer at heart. Don't use the shiny new thing if you don't need to. I love it.
Yeah, well, because it's not only just more setup and more expensive, it's also there's more friction to using it too, right? Because of the fine grained control over query. Like if you want to do new queries, it's a longer process. So even just
it's tough to. Oh, I was just gonna say it's tough to query data when you can't see it. Like you can't see all the data, so it's tough. Sorry, Michele, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say there's all of the ways, the old ways of delivering and sharing data, APIs or whatever it be, data share, whatever. There's still value in different ways for different ways of sharing that information. So sometimes an API may still be the right approach, sometimes a data share, sometimes a clean room, and making sure that you're kind of setting things up in the right way for the right needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And flat files.
Sometimes it's
S3 buckets still work.
S3 bucket.
That's right.
Exactly.
And like you said, it ain't broke. Don't fix it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think I've got everyone's questions. Are there any more questions? Anyone in the audience? We got 5 minutes left. Going once, going twice. Actually, I don't want to give people too much pressure on typing quickly. Maybe if anyone is typing right now, because I can't see, there's no thing that says like so-and-so is typing. Maybe I'll just take this time to say thank you to everyone for coming. Hopefully this was valuable and enjoyable. And thank you, Michele, for doing this. Thank you, Sarth. I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it looks like no more questions, just a bunch of emojis and yeah, good stuff. All right, well, thank you guys. I think this webinar will be available at this link for quite some time. So if you want to share it with friends and family who want to know about data, please feel free. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Have a good day, everyone.